At Skating PJ, Kelsey Bennett, we are here to talk about coach pre-registration. As always, if you put your questions and comments into the bar below, we'll see them and we'll respond to them. And Kelsey, let's get started by talking about coach pre-registration and where we're at. So let's start about where we were. Let's talk about the history of the coach pre-registration process. How did it come about?
So it was coach-driven.
Yeah.
Coach-driven, coach-inspired project.
What does that mean?
So that really means the coaches came to us, and we reached out to the coaches, and we're looking for how to improve the registration from last year.
Okay.
So we really wanted to hear from the coaches specifically what would make their lives easier from a provincial scope, and that's what we did. So we reached out. We had a group of around 15 coaches that we worked with on improving the system, brainstorming, come up with some ideas, and they represented small clubs, big clubs, rural, urban clubs from all across the province. And so we got to really hear from, what we think represented all types of different coaches out there, and which was really important. Talk to them what they wanted, and then we, based on those conversations, designed with Uplifter this pre-registration and piloted with over 30 coaches. So there's 30 coaches that piloted this before we decided that was what we wanted to use and do moving forward.
So in my capacity currently as sort of temporary communications manager, one of the things that happened was that people were under the impression that we were, as Skate Ontario, just sort of acting in isolation, sort of in a dark room somewhere. So that does not appear to have been the case.
No, definitely not.
Okay. So now, and Leah, hi back from Alberta, by the way. So what we wanted to do was to find a way so that more skaters ultimately could get into competitions of the coach's choice. The coaches being an important part here because it's the coaches who take the kids to competitions.
Exactly.
So what did you find out in doing this process?
In terms of, I think we found out what was really important for coaches. I mean, there's lots of things, but from a registration standpoint, they really wanted to be able to go to a competition where they could bring all of their athletes. That was really, really important for them. And so that was a driving theme for us as we designed this. So that's why when coaches would be in pre-registration and they need to give us the number of athletes they had in each of these various category groupings by series. So the idea is that we were looking at their numbers at a whole in order to assign them to a competition based on that. So that was really interesting for us to go down that path.
So we're going to talk about the numbers in just a minute, but let's talk right now in real time about real competitions that have just happened and what you have seen. So let's talk about the first few events that you've had and what you've noticed.
Yeah, so that we've currently had 3 competitions that have opened and closed. So we've had Skokie Skate in
That's
Huntsville.
a hard one to say.
That was a hard one. Monday morning, sorry. Baltimore, so Super Series, so Blades in Baltimore, and KISS. So for those, so I'm just going to go through the numbers for you. So for Huntsville, so we sent out 528 links to coaches.
And the links were for what?
For an athlete. So that represented a link per athlete to register in the pre-registration timeline, which is the 7 days. The parents just needed to go in, register, and pay at their leisure. So they had kind of like pre-access into registration.
So I'm Skate Ontario, and you're a coach, and I sent you, let's say, 10 links. Did each of those links represent a skater in an event?
Correct.
Or just a skater? Or both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the idea was that I sent instructions in the email for you to then forward those links along to your parents.
Correct.
In order for them to register and pay for the event within that 7-day process.
Exactly.
And this was before what we were talking about was this final registration that would then open afterwards to allow for people to register for the remaining spots. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so back to your numbers. 528 links were sent to coaches.
253 were accepted.
Okay.
And what I think is important to note or understand is that would have been those coaches' first choices.
Okay.
So it was interesting for us to see that 275 spots were not taken. That was interesting for us. However, once we pre-registration closed, and then we opened up final registration, which is when it's a free, anybody can register. And when that happened, we actually closed registration at 420 spots, so with no wait lists. And we had 361 registrations last year. So we have more people that are going to that competition than they have before.
So 59 more people were able to access the competition. Everybody got into this competition, no wait list.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think what's also really interesting for us, just looking at this information, was that there were 6 coaches that didn't use their link at all. So they could have had anywhere from 1 to 20 to 30 kids, or 30 links, specifically, that they did not use. All those spots were essentially put into final registration afterwards, which is fine. However, going through our first competition, those were really interesting and important data for us to dig into a bit further. So for Baltimore, we sent out 275 links, or 265, 265
We're looking at papers
links
here, by the way.
And there were 88 total registrations during that pre-registration timeline. So that's a really, really low.
So only 33% of the coaches who received links actually forwarded them on to parents for parents to pay for those events. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that also meant, so there's 16 coaches that didn't use that link. And when we start seeing these numbers, we want to understand why. Is there a misunderstanding of what they were supposed to do with that information? Part of why we're here today as well. And in the end, we had, registration is closed, and we've had pretty good numbers for Baltimore, but there's still tons of space. By no means are we at full capacity, and there's no wait list for Baltimore. Then moving into KISS, so we had 550 links sent to coaches, and 220 accepted that. So that's 40% of the registration links that we were sent out, had been accepted. KISS closed last night, and we had a cap of 592, and we closed with 590. So no wait list, everybody in.
Okay, so before we go further a little bit with the numbers, Janet Jewett has a great question. Can I ask why some clubs didn't get the pre-registration link who chose one of these 3 competitions as their first choice?
Yeah, definitely. There were more people that chose, Huntsville or KISS or Baltimore for their first choice than we had the capacity to let in. So if there were 590 spots for KISS, for example, there were over 590 coaches and athletes that wanted that event as their first choice. Initially.
Yep.
So we had to make some decisions on who would have got that competition or not. So that's why not everyone, if they chose that as their first competition, would have got that.
So the important thing to notice, though, is that although coaches may not have received a link as their first choice to one of those 3 competitions, all of the skaters who wanted to get into those competitions got in.
Right, exactly, because they had this opportunity to go in final registration, and everybody got in. There's no wait list, so everyone's in. Exactly.
So what did you notice in going through these numbers? What did you notice in terms of some of the challenges with this pre-registration system? Everybody needs to understand that this is the first year that this has been done. So there were bound to be things that were not going to work as we took it off the paper into real life. So what were some of the things that you noticed right off the top?
Well, the numbers that coaches submitted were very large. So the idea that numbers were padded, understanding that coaches wanted to make sure that their athletes had spots at competitions. So, if they might have had 20 athletes, they might have said they actually had 30 athletes because they, coaches had the opportunity to put in numbers in different category groupings. And so if they just put 1 or 2 more athletes in each of those category groupings, we had 9, I believe, category groupings. That adds up across the board when there were 568 coaches that completed this. So, that really pads the numbers significantly, really, really fast. So just a small padding for each category grouping by coach really explodes with those numbers. So those numbers were really high and not what we were expecting based on the information we had about the athletes and coaches that were out there in Ontario.
The other thing that was kind of interesting was the fact that it's very, very common in today's skating world for people to team coach. And what you didn't account for is the fact that if you and I were team coaching, each of us put in a coach pre-registration and accounted for all the students that we share. So part of one of the myths that we're going to talk about later is the fact that you didn't need to be attached to the numbers in order to be able to attend the competition.
Correct.
So that was one of the things that we can absolutely understand why people would both, in terms of team coaching, each taken the same number of skaters and inputted them into the system. So that's one of the things that for messaging we're going to be able to help next year sort of make more clear distinctions as to what people need to do in terms of the numbers. We get it. You want to pad a little bit? Absolutely. That makes sense. You're not sure if this person's going to be, a star 3 or a star 4 this year. Like,
we understand.
We get it. But what ended up happening is that you had a couple of cases where people were including numbers that were like well over 100, and then once they got pared down, because your staff went through a process by vetting the numbers with the coaches as well, just to confirm that they were correct. So there were some instances where they were over 100.
Exactly.
So when they got pared down to 16. So we totally get it. First year, things people want to make sure that their clientele is looked after. So there's every reason to try and do things in that way. So was there anything else that you noticed when you spoke to the coaches? Because when you vetted those numbers on the telephone, what did you find out?
We found out that, I think in those initial phone calls is that those were kind of the two biggest takeaways from it, to be honest. Those were, they wanted to make sure that their kids were in. I think that there might have been some cases where if they have different coaches, if some are the dance coaches and some are the free skate coaches, people might have duplicated them that way. So we just clarified that they just need to be accounted for in dance with the dance coach and then free skate with the free skate. Like that was, that discipline confusion, just want to make sure they were taken care of. Absolutely, that was some confusion there.
It's interesting. Okay, so Stacy, I'm interested in what your comment is. So Stacy is saying, with the deadline being in the summer before the season starts, I'm thankful that my coach used the padding so that, I'm so sorry, I can't see any more of that particular question. So, the padding, Stacy, the padding makes complete sense. The reality is that even though, and this is me speaking as a former coach, even if you didn't work in the summer, you were sort of on top of what was happening in the sport because that's just the way that it is. So it's good that I believe that you were saying that your new coach used the padding so that you were, I'm assuming, able to be in, there we go. Use the padding so that my daughter, it's your daughter, so that my daughter who has just started with her coach could still participate when we joined her this fall. Is the deadline in July a concern for next year? I don't think so, because the majority of people who are working in this area understand that this is going on, and especially next year they will understand it more clearly. But I think that what we're finding is the number of spots that we have available to skaters is making it accessible. So let's talk a little bit about numbers, where they were 2 years ago, where they are today.
Yep, absolutely. So we went back to 2017, 2018.
Which was year one.
It was year one of the amalgamation. So at that point, it was what we refer to as status quo. So as Skate Ontario, we did not change the schedule or the calendar of events at all. We just inherited what was there from the past 4 sections, and so we continued onwards with those. We just managed registration, so we did not put any type of caps on anything. They just came in. So what's great about that is that we can go back to that information and see where our final numbers were. So based on that, so that's 3 years ago now, 3 seasons ago, so we had over 16,621 registrations, and that really equals spots for us in 2017, 2018. And so those competitions include inter-clubs, club events, anything basically from, October, so Skokie skate, to anywhere in April, so including Scarborough skate. It doesn't include anything that we would now consider sectionals series, just because those are separated out. We're not, so we wanted to compare apples to apples with this one. So what's really, I think, really interesting about those numbers, we just have those numbers, which is really, really powerful. And then what's exciting is that this year, right, so for the 2019-2020 season, we have more capacity than we did then. So we have 17,314 spots leading into this upcoming season. So I think that that's, I want to spread that word out to everyone, that there are more spots than we had 2 or 3 years ago. Sorry. So that's
no, it's 2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Yep. This is season 3. That was season 1.
Yeah, and that's done. You might. How did we do that? So it's like we have ensured during the bid application process that all those host clubs that submit to host an event have at least 3 days of ice with 2 pads, specifically in Southern Ontario. That's where we needed to ensure we had lots of ice time so we could increase that capacity. We also have made sure that all the events that we had on the calendar, that there's hosts for every single one of those competitions. So in the Star 1 to 4 series, we have all of those events. We have those 17 events have hosts, and the same with the Super Series. So there's no gaps in anybody hosting those events. So we've got lots of capacity. We want to spread that word out because it's really great.
And did you find in season 2 that you were down 5 events?
Correct. Yes. Thank you. So last
3,000
season,
spots.
Yeah. So 2018, 2019. So
Yep.
what happened is that we were down leading up into the season. So we had done a competition. We designed the competition schedule, put out bid applications, and there were 5 events that we did not receive. We couldn't get a host for. There were 4 in the Star 1 to 4 competition series, and specifically those were in Southern Ontario, which was really challenging for everyone involved. So that alone for 4 competitions equals 2,400 spots, which is really, really big. And we had 1 Super Series that did not have a host, which, give or take, gives us around 600 or so spots. So that we were basically right out of the gate missing 3,000 spots because we didn't have hosts for those competitions. So that was hard for everyone last year.
So let's go through a couple more questions. Kelly Barnes says, I'm not sure if others are in the same boat, but for instance, I have 10 skaters in Star 4. I have some that will only do 2 competitions and others who would do 4 or 5 or more. So one of the challenges, of course, in balancing out all of these meaningful competitive opportunities is to find that tipping point,
right,
where it's not just what I call engaging, what I used to say as a coach, the sparkle factor, which is the new dress and the sequence, which frankly is my favorite part. And understanding that learning how to skate and learning how to skate well is a process.
Right.
So, Kelly, I'm not really sure what you mean with that particular question about, because it sounds to me like you would be trying to put those 10 skaters in at least the same 2 events, and then the other additional 2 or 3 events would be maybe left up to final registration.
Yeah, I guess that's part of the exciting piece that we're coming to, is that now we have more capacity than we've ever had in terms of spots available for people. So we have the ability, so if you have the majority of your skaters that really want to be competing, then you can put those numbers in your pre-registration. And if there's a couple that might only want to do a few and you're not quite sure in the summer, if we're leading ahead to next year, what events they want to do, there's like, we always will reserve spots for final registration for that exact example, right? Like, you might not know what they want to do, so you have the option to wait. And that's, I think, the best way to approach that, knowing that there's lots of spots, and that final registration is designed for that purpose. We're not exclusively requiring coaches to submit early in the season for everyone, because we knew, in talking to the coaches, that would be too hard. It'd be too hard for everyone to commit to that. So that's why we left that flexibility. I'm not sure if it answers it for that one exactly, but we've also separated the pre-registration for Star 1 to 4 series versus the Super Series. So you do capture different levels of skaters, and so that could help you out as well.
Kelly's just gotten back to us, and she said she was responding to the reason that some competition coaches might not use all their links.
Right, yes, no, of course. Yeah, I think for sure. I think that is a huge learning from this past year, and I think we can, talk more about that and how to approach submitting those numbers for next year.
So Shamrock Figure Skating Club asks, our season hasn't started yet, so we find it very difficult to predict numbers. Enrollment numbers are still unknown at this time, so it's very hard to predict numbers so early on. Can you make any suggestions on how we can make the system work? I think, if I could just address this, that typically in figure skating clubs, the change in registration is by a few percent sort of up or down. So I think you can probably still base your best guess on what happened last year will in all likelihood happen this year. Where it's different is the year after the Olympic Games. Often there's a bit of a bump, maybe even as much as 10% in terms of registration, especially in areas where figure skaters have come from. So I think that that's what you can do, and just perhaps speak to your coaches by the end of the season this year to figure out what they're anticipating for next year. You can also canvass or survey your membership to figure out where they're going to be in a year's time. So Jocelyn Christie has a couple of questions. Please keep in mind as you move forward in planning next year that higher level skaters will sometimes compete without their coaches.
Okay.
True, but it's their coaches who still suggest that they go to a competition, I would say. Also, if you find yourself in a position like Baltimore where your pre-registration is super low, it might be better to invite coaches who selected the competition but not as their first choice to pre-register before last chance opens. So we were talking about adjusting numbers. So where do you stand with that, Kelsey?
Well, I think actually for Jocelyn's question, so it's a good idea. However, we want to respect the timing as well, because we want to make it fair. So what we really pride ourselves in for this year is that we want parents to have those 7 days to go in at their leisure. We knew that experience was really challenging last year. So we want to keep that. So the idea that if we were to go deeper into that list of who might have chose Baltimore as the example as their second choice, then to send out an email to those parents and give them the 7 days and wait for them to come back and see where those numbers are. And if it didn't fill up, then go to the third choice and do that over and over again. It could take over a month to do all the way up to start the choice number 5. So we don't have we want to make it fair for everyone. So the timing is really challenging. We want to align with that. So that's why we're not doing that.
Leanne Petra said, do the coaches know what competitions their skaters have gotten pre-registration for, or do they find out when the link is sent? Can parents plan ahead?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole plan. That's the whole goal of this. So what we are going to touch on later on today is that we are sending out the final links. Sorry, I don't want to get the language confused. We're going to send pre-registration links, the rest of the assignment for the rest of the year to all coaches by the end of this week. And so by the end of this week, your coaches will know exactly what competitions they have pre-registration links for, so that they can plan for their year. Again, that was, out of the gate with the coaches, one of the exciting pieces of this, that, best case scenario, if the numbers came in as we thought they were going to, then they would have been able to plan their season and not have to worry about final registration. So yeah, that was a driving force behind this.
Now the thing that we want you to notice too is that we'll be taking advantage of Facebook to say when the last of the links has been sent out. So that will be announced on Facebook so that you guys will know for sure that all the links have gone out. So Charlene wants to know about Bowmanville.
No, so the only registrations that have been sent out so far are Huntsville, Kiss, and Baltimore. That's it. And the rest will go out before the end of the week.
So, and watch for Facebook for him to say all the links are sent out.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you think about it, I think that everybody was trying their absolute best to make this work. I know that some of the coaches were having a hard time with this whole process because it's certainly different, and it's different from anything that's happening anywhere else in the country, I believe. So the idea was to try and make it so that parents at work were not sitting on the computer at noon and then at 12:01 finding that the events were full. So if the first 3 events are any indication, that seems to be working. So is there room to improve? What do you think?
Always.
Yeah, always, indeed. So is this something that's going to be abandoned or
definitely not
improved? Okay, tell me why.
No, we see that the framework's really strong. We think still. I think. Looping back to the fact that it really roots from that we have capacity to have competitive opportunities for the skaters across the province. We have enough competitive opportunities and spots. So, in knowing that and feeling confident about that, the next step was about finding, and still is, about let's now try to ease the registration process. How do we make it an enjoyable experience for all sides? And again, so that's where this idea of this this opportunity for coaches in the summer, if when we move forward with it, to continue to identify the number of athletes they have and what competitions they need to go to. When we start to refine those numbers more and more, and we, in the future, we can then be in the situation where in the fall, coaches can know the number of competitions they're going to and the number of athletes they have, and then their year can be planned. We think, and I think the coaches still feel that that's a really strong, that's what we want, right? We don't want to wait until 6 weeks or 7 weeks before a competition to register and see if we get in, and if we don't, go to a different competition. Like it's a hard way to plan a season. So we feel really strongly that this approach, I think is still really good. And we need to continue to figure out how to tweak the best way to put in numbers that are right, and that also have flexibility for athletes and skaters that are changing categories and might not have moved to that club yet, or et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we want to continue to have more of those conversations and reach out to more and more coaches and make it better, because we feel strongly, and I've had many conversations with lots of people that feel that it's a really strong framework still. It just it's the first year, so there's an understanding that there was we've room to improve on some parts.
So Jocelyn Christie has another great question. Now that there is more data, what is the number of events that coaches can expect to be allocated? I know you were only guaranteeing one in the summer. Has that changed? So I want to, you've got some numbers which are great, and I want everybody to understand in the audience that the numbers are what they are, partly based on the lack of specificity.
It's a hard word.
It's a hard one.
The data that was given to us.
But also the fact that some of the coaches didn't realize that, and we didn't realize that team coaches were duplicating. So this is where we're at today with all of the things that will be changed for next year. So where are you at with numbers so far? It's all in the papers. It's always the papers.
All right, here we are. Okay, so I think, again, just like building on what PJ said, is that these aren't the numbers that people want to hear, I guess, and we acknowledge that, but we know that, keeping in mind that we still have a lot more capacity than we've ever had, and that final registration is an opportunity, and based on those 3 competition examples that we went through to date, it's working. Like, people are still getting into competitions, there's no wait lists, so just to keep that in mind. So for the number of coaches, and this is split up, to keep in mind, for Star 1 to 4 series, Super Series, and then I can also give the good news about Synchro Series as well. So for Star 1 to 4, the number of coaches that will get one event is 389.
So that's guaranteed.
Guaranteed you get one competition.
Okay.
The number of people that will get guaranteed 2 events is 141. And the number of people that will get 3 events is 11.
So next year, if the numbers that are reported to Skate Ontario are more clear and more definite and more accurate, do you expect those numbers to go up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So let's talk about Super Series.
Yeah, so for the Super Series, so the number of coaches that will get one event is 345. The number of coaches that will get 2 events is 125. The number of people that will get, or coaches that will get 3 events, is 13.
Yep.
And then there's 1 coach that will get 4 competitions, and that's specifically because they would have chosen really northern competitions that didn't have full subscription to them. So that's how that works.
Okay, so that's where we're at in terms of the numbers.
But I can give the Synchro Series update as well.
Synchro.
And Synchro is, here, my numbers are here. So
Me.
Synchro is exciting. So this framework worked really, really well for Synchro. I mean, obviously it's a different beast because you can do teams, right? So there was just over 200 teams that participated in pre-registration, and that also accounted for teams that were outside of Ontario, provincially and nationally, actually. And so everyone got into all the events that they wanted to get into, which is massive. The only exception is that for Synchro Fest, that was the most popular competition with the most amount of teams that wanted to get into that. There are a number of teams that will not get into that competition, However, every other, if teams chose 5 competitions, they got into them, which is amazing and super exciting. And synchro really, it was challenging last year for teams to get into competitions. We went through a really big, serious format change, which now has allowed for all those teams to be able to participate a lot this season. So thank you, team, for those coaches for doing that, and team managers. And I think it's great. I think it proves that the system can work and is working.
So Leslie Ruggieri said, if a coach ends up taking on new skaters partway through the season, are they expected to use the last chance registration for specific competitions? There are 2 answers to that.
Yeah.
One is about, remember, if you had the skaters before, and they've now come to me,
right?
You can phone Skate Ontario, and
yes.
So explain that process a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So, right, if you're from a coach perspective, if you know a skater's leaving, is that the right way to say it?
Well, actually, it's more
the other way around.
Sorry,
yes, that they have arrived. Yeah, so exactly. So I think that if there's a couple different options, but the easiest way is to call us at Skate Ontario, and we can talk about yours as a case by case. But we can, we can make sure that athlete, if that skater had been accounted for from another coach, is taken care of. And basically, the last chance is always available for them. If the coach that might have accounted for them beforehand wanted to go to a different competition that you wanted to go to and you didn't have enough spots for them, you can go for a final. The other piece, if that doesn't sound confusing, is that if, for example, you had 10 spots for a specific competition, and you'd reserved 10 spots, and only 8 of your athletes wanted to go to that, and then you have this new skater that comes in, they can take that 9th spot, and that's all good.
They are not actually assigned to individual skaters. They're assigned to levels.
Correct.
Really, the spots. Okay. Kelly Barnes, are you going to be able to let coaches know which competitions they will have spots at for planning the rest of the year?
Correct. Yes, you will 100% hear by the end of this week. And again, like PJ said, we're going to post on Facebook when all those emails have been sent out to the coaches. So we're gonna talk about next steps in a little while to give you more details on that. But yeah, absolutely, by the end of the week, you'll know.
Can you say, let's talk a little bit about the myths around the pre-registration process.
Yep.
This is our section called Mythbusters. Pamela Krolick wants to know, will coaches find out sooner next year? That's the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first year. There were some things that we didn't expect, including, as we discussed, duplicate registration of skaters, and numbers that were inflated to a point that just didn't make any sense. So that took away some of the resources that would have been allowed or available to let coaches know. That then had to be, those resources then had to be dedicated to finding out for sure the accuracy of the numbers. So Pamela, for sure that's the plan next year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about Mythbusters. Kelsey is the Mythbuster.
Ooh. One actually that I was told about this morning, actually. So, how is it framed? So the idea that if you don't get a pre-registration link, that means you'll never be able to get into a competition, or you can't actually register for a competition, and that is 100% a myth. You have the final registration. So if you don't get a pre-registration link, you aren't able to go online, register, and pay during that 7-day window. However, you are absolutely, everyone is welcome to final registration for every single competition. I think is really, really important. And again, back to the fact that we have more spots than we've ever had before. Please know that you can always go to final registration.
That is, okay, Sally Baldwin, to that point. From your numbers, most coaches are guaranteed one competition only. Mm-hmm. So why aren't you expecting wait lists to be just as bad as last year for the spots that remain?
Because we have more
great
spots
question,
than great question. But we have more spots than we did last year. Like again, I don't know if you were watching earlier, but so when we were in the 2018-2019 season, we were 5 competitions short of what we wanted. And they were all in Southern Ontario, and that accounted to 3,000 spots. So that's a huge, that's a lot of opportunities for skaters in Southern Ontario. And so that really, really hurt us, and it hurt the skaters, it hurt the coaches. But now we've got all those competitions. We have 17 Star 1 to 4. We have 17 or 16 Super Series. So we've got lots of competition. So that's why we don't believe that will be the case.
The other thing
for
is
all competitions.
Yeah. I was just going to say to Sally, the other thing is that last year with diminished capacity, that was one problem. And of course, the registration was enormously difficult. Everybody acknowledges that. There's no getting around that particular thing. But what happened was, if you didn't get into competition A, what you then tried to do was to get into competition B in a neighboring community from where you first wanted to go, which put huge pressures on that competition. And it just was like a domino effect all the way down sort of like the pathway. So the idea is that people will be able to so that's one of the things that we're trying to sort of plot against. The Golden Horseshoe is where the majority of figure skaters are in Ontario. So we had to make sure that there was enough capacity within the Golden Horseshoe area to be able to accommodate the skaters. And that's what has been addressed so far. Are you anticipating any competitions that will be particularly...
Yeah.
Okay. But that's always the way it's always been.
Yes, exactly. And I think we can see that by the interest in specific competitions through pre-registration. And also, so those specific competitions would be Brampton, which is always very popular, most likely probably Grimsby and Milton. Those are, I think, the big heavy hitters, and Gloucester in Ottawa, I think, where there's the most interest through pre-registration that we see, that people are interested in. I also wanted to speak to one of the things we also learned last year, obviously the importance of having all competitions have host clubs, but also being really purposeful of the number of, or the categories that are at each competition. In looking at the schedule or the opportunities charts, you can see that the Super Series specifically in the Golden Horseshoe, Southern Ontario, you will not see a competition that has Star 1 all the way up to senior, because we want we want all categories to, we don't want to limit those or the number of people in those categories. So what we've done instead is limit those categories. So you'll see standalone Star 1 to 4 competitions in Southern Ontario, and you'll see Super Series that only start from Star 5 and above. And that is by design to make sure there's more capacity at those competitions. And that's really different from even, the Ottawa area or, northern parts of the province. Like, you will have Super Series that have Star 1 all the way up to senior, and they'll have all those categories. So that's the thinking behind the design, that you'll see there's different categories offered in different places and at different times of year. But the Southern Ontario part is really because we wanted to make sure there weren't wait lists and people that could get into competitions.
Jocelyn says, last chance for Huntsville and Baltimore worked really well for me.
Yeah.
Kudos to Kelsey.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
But would it still be better if parents didn't have to manage this during their workday? You know what? The reality is people work, and the reality is somebody's workday is somebody else's rest time. And it just, I don't know that there is another way to manage that.
Yeah, that one's hard. I mean, really the answer for us was that we wanted pre-registration to help that as much as possible. But we know that, again, back to the fact that those first 3 competitions, they were open for the full 5 days, and we didn't reach a wait list. So I know that after last year is a hard piece to feel okay with the fact that you can wait until the evening to register. I fully get that, but we just based on those first 3 competitions, you can be in that position, and you don't have to stop your work day.
Maggie Aziz wants to know, how will the Super Series pre-registration links work for adult categories? Should coaches have included adults in their numbers?
Yes. So adult was a bucket for coaches. Absolutely. So coaches did account for those adult categories.
And Janet wants to know, is there any way you can track numbers for skaters and where they are competing? For example, it would be beneficial to see how many skaters from the north are actually willing to travel further north or down south where the competitions are being held. Perhaps this could help in spreading out the competitions better. There are a number of competitions that are available in the north, I believe. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. But
Great question, Janet.
I love data and looking at that stuff.
She does love data. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we, we'll continue to look at that and make sure. Yeah, that's part of where. That's always where we start from designing these competition calendars. So we continue to look at that. Absolutely.
Is there anything? So one of the questions was, if you get this data and you realize that there are a whole bunch of unused links representing competition spaces, what happens to those links?
Okay, so when they get put into final registration.
Okay. So all those spots become available.
Correct.
The spots that you anticipated for that competition, they become available. Are coaches able to contact you if they realize now that they're not going to be going to XYZ competition?
Yes. So I think more specifically for that one, if, after time goes on and listening to this and understanding or having the opportunity to reflect on the numbers that were submitted and knowing now, obviously it's end of September now, and you might have a better handle on the number of skaters you have for this season. If you know you have less than what you did submit in pre-registration, and you are willing to kind of give up those spots, yes, please email me directly and we can release those spots. That would be, yes, absolutely, we want to do that to just let more and more people have more competitions early. That would be, it's really helpful for everyone if that's the case.
kbennett@skateontario.org.
Correct.
That's the direct email for the brains of the operation. Okay, so please make sure you keep those questions and comments coming, because we're going to stay on Facebook Live as long as there are things to talk about. Are there any other rumors that you've heard of that you want to address for our Mythbusters?
Yeah, there was. What were the other ones? Where did those go?
There you go.
No, we did talk about that one. Oh, Skate Ontario athlete numbers are on the decline. That is a myth I'd like to bust. So we have recently received updated registration numbers from Skate Canada, and based on the registration submitted to date, Ontario is the only section that actually has growth in membership.
So that's good news.
Really good news.
To tell you the truth, in my capacity in other areas of the skating world, people are always saying skating is dying, and I said, I don't see that. So we just need to know that people still love coming to the rink. It is different from when it was when I was young, because people just typically focused on one activity.
Right.
And I'm happy to say that people are focusing on all kinds of different activities in childhood, and I think that that's absolutely the best possible thing that can continue to sort of come out there. So Synchro is basically all of the events have happened, not happened, but all the pre-registration links, they're going to happen for the Synchro competitions. People are able to get into those competitions. And is there anything else that you're thinking of on the horizon for competitions that you can advise for the coaches?
Well, yes. So in terms of, I think that's my cue for next steps.
I think that's her cue for next steps.
Okay, so yes, so for the coaches, so this week you will receive an email from Skate Ontario by series. So if you are a coach that submitted numbers for Star 1 to 4 and Super Series, you'll get 2 different emails.
Okay.
And that email will have the list of your 5 competitions that you selected, and next to it you'll have a link for the competition 1 or how many ever you got that you have a link to pre-register into. And that email will also, it's designed for you to basically forward that, if you choose, to your parents. It has next steps for them and for you. So in that email, there'll be a direct link to where the timelines for when pre-registration opens and closes. So we just advise everyone to make sure you're aware of that date for what competition you're into, and also to be aware of the final registration deadlines that are out there. Because as I've been saying, please take advantage of those as well. We need you to. We want you to. So that is coming down the tube. I think what's really important is that, yes, coaches must send that email to parents in order for them to go online, register, and pay for pre-registration. That is a required step. So if again, what's really important is that as a coach that submitted the pre-registration back in the summer, your email is directly linked to those numbers.
Okay.
And so, we sent out an email a few weeks ago. So what's also important, and this is also explained in the email that we're going to send out, is that when a parent registers a skater, they need to put a coach's email address in, which they've done in the past, but it's critical that they put the name of the coach that sent them that link. So if you're team coaching, just to make sure that that is from the coach that did indeed get that pre-registration link. That's super, super important because we track it. So on our end, at the office, what we see is if we see an athlete with a coach name that doesn't match what we have on file, then they are not in the event. So we'll email them and say, we'll ask them if there was a team coaching issue, but essentially they're not. That's not a completed registration.
So on to that point, before we go any further, you and I are team coaches. Mm-hmm. I sent the parents the link. You're the one going with the kid to the competition.
Yeah.
The coach, the parent says your email address instead of mine because you're the one attending. Whoever attends with the skater, we're not talking about that. We're just wanting to track who specifically had the link. And that's to prevent somebody else just sort of grabbing that link and saying, no, my coach did this. So what we're trying to do is just make sure that the coach for whom that competition, that's their competition, we want to make sure that that's their link.
Exactly. And then I think also if you are...
Safeguards the process.
Exactly. And that, again, this will be explained in the email, but that if you have space as a parent to put attending coach number 2, so that can be the other team coach, and that can actually be the coach that's going on site. I mean, that's what we recommend because that's also the way that when we send communication about a specific competition, that communication will go to both those emails.
Excellent.
So I hope that makes sense. So coaches will be getting an email again from Skate Ontario this week. We will by series. So you'll get one again for Star 1 to 4 and Super Series and Synchro if you're a coach that does all 3. And it will say the number of competitions or a link that will be beside your competitions. There's a dash. If you see a dash next to your choice, that means you did not get that competition. Also, point of clarification, for Star 1 to 4, there were options for coaches to choose a Super Series as one of their Star 1 to 4 options. So you may see in your email, if you did Star 1 to 4 and Super Series, that you get a link for both. That doesn't mean they're duplicate; they're just accounted for the same. So if I had 20 kids in Star 1 category, Star 1 to 4 category, and I also accounted for that in the Super Series, that would be, you've got that. It's a line. It's not a double link to send out, if that makes sense.
And we will send out a communication on Facebook saying that all of the links have been sent out. Mm-hmm. So that will happen later on this week as well. Mm-hmm. So in terms of next steps, that's the next thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really big step. And then from there, we have a lot of competition. So this is going to happen fast. We are going to start sending out emails this afternoon to folks. But this, just to let people know, first, there are some upcoming competitions that are opening up on Friday. So pre-registration opens up on Friday for Star 1 to 4 competitions. There's Bowmanville, Woodville, and Rockland Clarence Creek.
Ville. No, kidding.
It's not Ville. It's not just a creek. And then for Super Series, there's Thunder Bay. So Thunder Bay number 4, and Stratford. Sorry, I just know them as the locations. There might be more fun names currently for them, but those 2 competitions that are happening. And for Synchro, Bill Phillips also opens up on Friday. So that will be information that, again, is in the email. So we want, we're going to get this out so that parents and team managers can register. Again, pre-registration, you have those 7 days as a parent or a team manager to go in at your leisure to register.
And then pay for the event.
And then we close registration for a day or so, and then any pre-registration links that weren't used, we move those into final registration, and final registration is open for anybody to get in there and register for a competition. That's open for 5 days or until it fills up.
Any other myths? Anything that you would like to talk about, Miss Kelsey, before we close her up?
Yeah, so I think that, there were if Skate Ontario has not contacted you by phone specifically, or generally by phone, to validate your numbers, that means that we have not updated your numbers. So we haven't reached out to you. So if you haven't heard from us and you want to update your numbers, please reach out. And we're happy to update those numbers on our end, for sure.
Jocelyn's got a specific question about Stratford, but in general, where can people find out about information about last chance registration for competitions?
Yes, so we will, on our website, we're going to update it with a bunch of highlights from today. Underneath Compete on the Skate Ontario website, we've got information for pre-registration, so we'll put all that information up there. We will, I think that's a good one, Jocelyn, we'll also put up a link to the opening and closing timelines for both pre-registration and final registration. But generally, what happens is pre-registration always opens on a Friday at noon. And it will go until it's open for 7 days, so it'll go till the following Friday. If I'm saying this right, we'll double check. And then it's open for 5 days, so it's open from the Tuesday to the Sunday. So final registration always opens on Tuesdays and opens and closes on Sundays.
Great. So
but all that information will be there for you.
And that's the best way to look for it.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to everybody. You have any last words?
I don't know.
Maybe. I think we've got everything.
No more questions?
Great info. Thanks, ladies. Roxy, thank you for being part of it. And Jocelyn and Janet and Maggie and Sally and Pamela and Kelly and Leslie. You guys brought, and Charlene. Charlene watched the website for the pre-registration for Bowmanville. Mm-hmm. Leanne, Kelly, Shamrock Figure Skating Club, Stacy, and Janet. Your questions have been greatly appreciated. It's this kind of feedback that has made it possible to even try this. So thanks again for being part of it, and we'll see you at the next Facebook Live.
Exactly.